Hi, welcome to the lesson on 32E Occupational Competencies. I'm Captain Evan Dix, and I'm going to be talking about a little bit of the history and background of the development of our occupational competencies and where we're going forward and how to use them and things like that, questions that may be on your mind about this. Okay, so let's establish some background here. So the presumption here is the CE enterprise has kind of determined that there is a deficit in officer core competencies, or rather, the CE enterprise believes that. So we've noticed that officers may be lacking skills or confidence, and that leads to some underperforming against certain expectations. They get thrown into situations they're expected to be able to do that they have little background, little experience in, or little education or training in as well. And some of that comes from a lack of opportunity to gain that fundamental knowledge or experience. They're not being put in the right roles and that sort of thing, and this has led to a cyclical problem. And so what we want to focus on is, with the return to near-peer competition, we want to identify the things that we need CE officers to be able to do so that we can focus on the development for them to get the opportunities that they need to develop and be able to do those things when the situation calls for it. So this has led to some sweeping changes in the Career Field Education and Training Plan, or the CFETP, to ensure more deliberate development of officer skills. So rather than just saying these are generically some things that you should be expected to do in the first 4 to 10 years of your career, and these are some things that you should develop a little bit later on, in the CFETP, we've strived to put these competencies in there so that officers know what is expected of them, at what grades, and they can move to seek development opportunities to attain those highest levels of proficiencies and focus on deliberate development of their education and experiences, rather than just hoping that we have enough people go through the right circumstances and the right things and that those people stay along in the Air Force career. We'll now have every officer know what is expected of CE officers, and we have a solid basis to track that development and communicate those development areas to both our own enterprise and externally. So one of the developments that came out of this in the CFETP is here at AFIT, we are developing a new captain's course that should be coming online by 2023. And so we are actively in the process of developing what this course is going to look like. But this is basically targeting new captains. So it'll start with the 2019 year groups and target the development that you might be missing in those gap years between when you come through 101, which is the first time you're required to come through the CE school as an officer, and when you come back as a selected CE squadron commander for our Management 400 class that may be at the 15-year mark. So currently, between year 1 and year 15, there is no requirement for you to come back to AFIT to get any education and that sort of thing, and so you may be missing out on some of these force development experiences unless you are just happening to be in the right place at the right time constantly. And so we want to reduce the amount of happenstance and focus on a more deliberate development of our officers. And so 201 or the new captain's course is one of the ways that we're striving to meet that gap in competency or education. And then the final thing here, as we go into talking about these officer competencies, is to point out that force development is everyone's responsibility, right? It's the officer's responsibility who's being developed to seek out the opportunities that they have, to know what's expected of them, and to learn what's expected of them. But it's also our NCO and senior NCO's responsibility to make sure that the officer is learning some of the capabilities that's expected of them in certain situations and giving them feedback when they're not doing what's expected. It's also the supervisor and commander's responsibility to mentor those officers along the way to use the competencies that we've now created as a checklist of sorts to measure the progress and proficiency level of that officer and put them in development areas where they're lacking and help them also play to their strengths in certain situations where that's required. Okay, so the development goal for our CE officers has always been to develop breadth and depth along the way, and the goal here is develop officers that will focus on basically the attainment and of eventually competing for squadron command, right? So we are developing CE officers to be CE squadron commanders, and that's kind of the focus of our career field education and training plan. So we know that we're going to achieve this through a combination of a breadth of experiences and certain education that we're going to get and training situations that we can be put through, right? So there's a combination of education, training, and experience, but the end goal is to develop a CE squadron commander, or somebody who is going to succeed and capably command a civil engineer squadron. So how the CE officer competencies were developed, here's a little bit of history and background for you, is a couple of years ago, in January of 2018, the Civil Engineer School established the need to develop the officer core competencies. It was sort of a conglomeration of things. We were trying to answer the question for ourselves of how do we know that what we're teaching is what is required of the CE enterprise. We have things like education working groups that measure the effectiveness and talk about what our courses should focus on. But for officers specifically, what are the core competencies that officers need to be able to do? And for our most important course, Management 101, the CE Officer Basic course, are we teaching the right things, and how do we know that we're teaching the right things? So we established the need to develop the officer core competencies to determine what it is that CE officers need to be able to do. So moving along through the timeline, we had various outside entity approval. So the A4C and Career Field Manager approved the effort to develop the 32E occupational competencies. And we had a working group later that summer where we had a bunch of officers and senior enlisted people. Over 25 individuals come from different MAGCOMs, different bases all over the Air Force to come and put together this initial list of occupational competencies that CE officers were able, that CE officers should be able to do. Then through the fall and winter, we had a writing team kind of get together and do some refinement and gap analysis. So initially the list was almost 150 competencies or something like that. And we were able to find some redundancies where some of these things were saying the same thing and figure out some of the gaps that were maybe missing and refine and get the right verbiage and that sort of thing. So the following year, the CE board, the highest governing body for the civil engineer enterprise, had a vector check to determine, okay, these are competencies, and we had sent those out to get them reviewed by several organizations, and that conglomerated in an occupational analysis survey that you may have remembered taking. So we surveyed the entire career field and looked for those specific competencies to say, are these competencies expected of civil engineer officers? When in your career are you expected to do them? And what level of proficiency are you expected to achieve by doing those? So again, you may have remembered taking that survey, but we used the results of those to do some analysis and come up with some further refinement into our finalized list that is now published in the Career Field Education and Training Plan. So after the results of that survey, the occupational competencies were approved, and then just as recently as this past fall, so November 2019, the CE Board directed the policy changes to increase our 32E core education, right? So that's coming with the development of Management 201 and things like that, because we realized that we did not have, there was a gap between what CE officers are taught in 101 and what is expected of them at certain points along their career. And so if there's a major gap and it's not being filled by education, you'd expect that it has to be filled by either training or experience, right? And we weren't comfortable with the level that it may be being filled by training or experience, just knowing the fact that sometimes officers take non-traditional assignments, right? Sometimes they're stationed at an installation that is not managed. It's a joint base that is not Air Force led. So they're going to have different experiences, which are great in personal development and growth, but not necessarily to achieving the core competencies that are expected of us. So we need to be able to know what those things are and have some education in there to develop those capabilities. Okay, so here's the meat and potatoes. Here are the officer competencies. So the results of that whole process that I just described that played out over the course of almost 2 years was the development of our list of, it's now about 72 descriptors. And we've categorized them into 7 core competencies that are in 3 different categories, and that's shown in this wheel behind me. That is part of the Career Field Education and Training Plan for 32Es now. So those 7 core competencies are the competency areas that we expect all of our CE officers, all of our 32Es to be able to do. We broke those down into 20 sub-competencies, and each one of those sub-competencies has several descriptors that describe behaviors of achievement for those competencies. So the example that I have behind me is in this planning and programming competency. I have 2 sub-competencies listed, the requirements identification and requirements validation. And each one of those have some descriptors as well as when officers should be able to do those, or when they should achieve a certain level of proficiency along in their career. So I can see that this first descriptor, the anticipate emerging requirements across the installation, as a second lieutenant, I'm expected to have a basic level of proficiency. As a junior captain, I'm expected to have an advanced level of proficiency, and as a senior captain, I'm expected to have a mastery level of proficiency. So that's how we're defining our levels of proficiency over here. Basic, advanced, mastery. Bam. So Colonel Olemaker loves to say that. So basic, advanced, and mastery, it's not a clear definition for every descriptor of what goes into achieving a basic level of proficiency, or an advanced level of proficiency, or a mastery level of proficiency. But there's some subjectivity into both the officer that is doing this descriptive behavior and the supervisor or commander that is observing these behaviors, is to, okay, well, what does a basic level entail for anticipating emergent requirements across the installation? Maybe it's that I understand that there are emerging requirements that come up and that we have a process to deal with them. And at an advanced level, I can actively take in those requirements and I know the best way to deal with them. And at a mastery level, I'm supervising other people who are doing that process, or something along that sort. So we've actually chosen at this point not to get too prescriptive into that and define those, because we want this to be flexible and utilized under engineering judgment. But we want it to be descriptive enough that it can be utilized to measure an officer's performance, or me as a developing officer can know what's expected of me generally, and I can seek to attain some of these capabilities, right? So we have these all these things listed out, right? Those are the competencies, the 7 core competencies broken down into sub-20 competencies and 72 descriptors. And so my goal as an officer is to be able to attain the highest level of proficiency for all of those collectively. So we understand that, again, officers have different experiences. I've been an instructor at the CE school for over 3 years now, so that has limited my development in some areas, but it has given me opportunities to develop in other areas, right? So I can look through the list of competencies and descriptors and see what is expected of me as a senior captain, and know the areas that are weak for me, and I may need to either take an AFIT course or get with somebody who knows how to do those things to help me develop that competency area. But I also know what areas I'm really strong in. So another way that I might want to utilize this is for looking at future assignments. If there are areas that I'm sort of weak in, so say I'm looking into the contingency operations, I may be seeking a deployment so that I can gain some of those aspects. Or I may be looking to move over into the readiness shop at my installation, or seek out that job for my next assignment, or something along those lines, right? So I can use this personally to guide my own development in terms of recognizing the areas that I'm strong and weak in, and trying to develop the areas that I'm not weak in, while also measuring it against what's expected of me as a senior captain. So the idea here is that we have this guidebook that allows all the officers to know what is expected of them at certain points in their career, and be able to measure that based on looking at the descriptors for those sub-competencies and whether you can do those or not, at what level of proficiency you can do them. So it's a great tool for mentoring development for reasons that I just mentioned, right? So I can start to develop the areas that I'm weak at, or I know the areas that I'm strong at, that I can excel in my performance. But also as a supervisor, so if I have a couple of young officers come into my squadron, I know what jobs maybe that they should be doing for their own development, or I know what AFIT courses to recommend to them based on the sub-competencies that they're weak at, right? So I can identify those areas that are gaps for that individual officer and help them achieve the highest level of proficiency possible. So again, we understand that everyone is going to have a different career path, and certain career paths are going to lead to higher than what's expected of you in terms of your level of proficiency, and certain career paths are going to be leading you to lower than what's expected of you for certain sub-competencies and individual descriptors. But we now have that guidebook to know what is expected of you, so you can use that to achieve the highest level of proficiency possible. So the guidance that we're putting out on this is basically officers should be focused on attaining the proficiency of sub-competencies that most directly correspond to their current job. So you've heard the phrase, bloom where you're planted. So whatever job you're currently in, you should be focusing on, you should be identifying the competencies, sub-competencies, descriptors that apply to that job specifically, and focusing on mastering those. And then once you feel like you're doing that well and you can do your job well, perhaps there isn't an opportunity for you to move jobs yet in your squadron or moving from installation to installation. So you can look for other opportunities, maybe by spending a week in your squadron with the EOD flight, or spending a week on a project, making sure that what is being built complies with the specifications, and going through that, even though that isn't your primary job. So we're looking for officers to achieve the highest level of proficiency possible by using the competencies that we've outlined in a smart way, so that you know what's expected of you. Okay, so we used to have the career field, the career development pyramid, and so now what we have put in the CFETP is an attempt to boil this down from something that's less murky, that basically just shows you, so these are, the base of the pyramid is a little bit bigger than the top, and these are some of the things that are expected of you. We put it on a timeline so it's a little bit more clear in terms of what's expected for CE officers at certain stages of your career, right? So we put this on the timeline of your rank, and even identified when promotion boards are happening, and broke this down into the experiences that we're expecting you to get for core and then outside of core, so career broadening, as well as the education that you're expected to have at certain points throughout your career. So I'd encourage you to look through this timeline to identify not only the experience opportunities, but the education opportunities. And there's also some language that explains this a little bit more in the new Career Field Education and Training Plan. So this is for your first 10 years of development, and then we have the other one that carries out through 10 years to the promotion of Colonel, or 06. What's expected of you for experience and education. So the types of jobs that you should be looking for, as well as the education you should attain. And then you can use this to compare to the officer competencies, the 32E competencies, and what's expected of you, to look for jobs that may maximize your ability to attain the highest level of efficiency for those certain aspects. Okay, so to sum this all up, we had a process to develop this list of competencies so that CE officers know what's expected of them. And so with that information, we expect CE officers to take ownership of their own career development, but we also expect NCOs, senior NCOs, commanders and supervisors to help take ownership of officer career development as well, right? If we develop officers the right way, we're going to have better commanded CE squadrons as a result. So this has honest conversations is a necessary. Honest conversations are a necessity for this to work, right? About the levels of proficiency in each officer and what what they are capable of, what they can do, and how that compares to what is expected of them. So having those honest conversations opens up opportunities for force development and to better develop those officers. And then we want all of our officers to be aggressively pursuing the highest level of proficiency possible through the ways that I mentioned, with development opportunities, either by jobs that you're seeking out, by education that you're getting, or by certain experiences that you're looking for just one-off times at your own installation. And so all of us can use this to help better develop our officers and better our career field. Thank you.